Hi there, I'm Jill Finley and I'm ready to start our sew along for the Sewing Bee quilt. And I've got Sewing Bee hanging up here behind me. This is the project we're going to be working on for the next 12 weeks. So you can join me here on my YouTube channel or on my website. I think you can also find a link to it on the Riley Blake site. And Riley Blake has generously offered for me to film the first couple sessions of this sew along in their fun studio. So we'll be looking at everything through their eyes, and then the later episodes will be filmed at home in my studio. So we're ready to get started, and I'm going to start by telling you what you're going to need. So this is episode 1, and in your pattern you will of course need a pattern, and this is the pattern for Sewing Bee. And in your pattern, on the first page, in the bold up here at the top, it tells you exactly the schedule for the sew along. And we're on week 1, so we're going to do the intro and the cutting today. And I'm going to explain a little bit about the quilt. And then you'll use your pattern as we go along. I'll explain a little bit more about that. So for episode 1, we're going to do all of our cutting for the whole quilt. Now, I tried, when I was making the quilt, I tried cutting as I was going, and it was difficult because I needed various pieces from different fat quarters, and then I wasn't really being efficient. So I think it's best to cut everything at once, and then you'll be all ready to go for the rest of the weeks. The quilt features a large garden block that's here on the top of the quilt. There's another one down on the bottom of the quilt that you can't see, but it's similar to this. It's all the very same elements, they're just arranged a little differently. And then it also features 2 panel blocks. And these blocks are from the panel, and so there's no applique in this quilt, no applique at all. It's all piecing. But if you don't happen to have the panel and you're using your own fabrics for this, don't panic, because you can fill these sections with whatever you'd like. So these are 2 20-inch blocks, and you can make a pieced block or use a large scale floral print would be pretty in there, or you could even do some applique if you choose to. But for us, we're going to be using the panel. And then there's a lot of these little star blocks that are in the sashing and the setting areas that go around these large blocks. So that's how it's going to work. So week 1 is cutting and figuring out what's happening in the quilt. And then week 2, we start with the star blocks. And we're going to start with this block. This is the first star block, that's star block A, and then there's 6 different ones. You can see that we've got a different one here, this one is a little different here, this one's different. So there's 6 different arrangement of stars, and each week for the first 6 weeks, we will do a star block. So that takes care of us up to week 7. And then on week 8, we're going to do the tulip blocks, and that's this block here. The tulip block includes the leaves, okay, for the tulips, and you're going to do 6 of them because you use 3 in the upper block and 3 in the lower block. And then week 9 is the daisies, and that's this little pink daisy and the more red daisy. And we've got, let's see, 4 of them in each block, so you do 8 of those. And week 10, we do the hydrangeas. That's what I'm calling these little pinwheel blocks. And there's a bunch of those in the upper section and in the lower section. And then week 11, we'll put this garden block together. So there's some piecing that is involved with sticking these pieces all together so that they fit into this block. So that's week 11. We'll make 2 of those. And then on week 12, we'll do all of our sashings, this blue sashing in between all of the blocks that you will have already made, and your whole quilt will come together. So that's how it's going to go. Now, let's get started on the cutting. First of all, I bought a kit. I've got a kit here. This is the kit that I'm selling on my website. If you don't have a kit, you can get one at your local retailer. Many shops are promoting this sew along, and so they'll have their own versions of the kit. But I want to tell you what's in a kit so that you know what you're going to need. Okay, first of all, there's the pattern, right? Set this aside. And then, oh, I should have opened this before. Okay. And then we have this blue queen print. This is the sashing, okay? And then, of course, you're going to need a panel. And we talked about that. If you want to substitute something for the panel, you can. The panel has 2 blocks, 2 different beehives. This is the box beehive, and then the other beehive. And I'll just show it to you right there. So there's the panel. Okay, we'll set that aside. Okay. And then you also need a fat quarter bundle and some white fabric for background. I've also included 1/8 of a yard of a yellow basic print. And the reason I'm including this is because the panel has this yellow beehive, and there's no yellow in the collection at all. So I wanted to be able to tie in that yellow beehive and make it make sense. So I've thrown in a little bit of yellow in some of the blocks and scattered them throughout. I think I used yellow in 6 or 7 of the blocks in just small pieces and scattered them throughout the quilt, and that helps that to hang together. So that's optional, but that's what I did. So let me open up the, set these aside, and we'll open up the fat quarter bundle, and I'll show you how that's going to, set that over there, how that's going to work. Okay, to start with, all right. Okay, we're ready to pull the fabrics from the fat quarter bundle to do some cutting. Before I tell you that, I want to mention that when I write a pattern, I always list the dimensions of the piece across first and then up and down. So when you see, for example, on this page that has the diagram, this shape right here is 5.5, oh, that one's a square, 9.5 by 2.5. So it's got the across dimension first and then the height dimension. And that's so you know which way to turn that piece. Well, this one's real obvious, but some of these are a little bit harder to know which way that goes. So I always put that way. However, in the cutting, if a piece is 2 by 3, and then there's also pieces that are 3 by 2, depending on which way you orient them, I put them all in one way. In the cutting directions, because our white background fabric that we're cutting from is non-directional and it doesn't matter. So you may be cutting a piece that's 2 by 3 and it may call for a piece that's 3 by 2. Same thing. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's just to help you when you're orienting your pieces. So the first thing we would do is cut all the white shapes that are listed right here, and I would cut those all at once and then label them as you go and set them out so that they're ready, easy for you to access as you're working on the quilt. I've got a picture here of what I did in my home studio as I was making the quilt, and I have all my white pieces laid out. And you really don't use a lot of them until you get into sewing this block together, which is week 11. So most of the ones used in the star blocks that we're going to do for the first several weeks are some of the smaller pieces, and you will know exactly which ones to pull for that week. So each week it will tell you what are we going to pull from this week. Okay. Now the next thing was the fat quarters, and here's how I've cut the fat quarters, and I'm going to explain that right now. So I've had you cut. Before you begin cutting everything out in a fat quarter, you're going to pull some of the pieces that you need for the garden blocks. So you need a red, and it says it right here in your pattern at the top of page 2. It says, using the fat quarter bundle, first cut the pieces listed below for the 2 garden sections. These are the garden sections. Okay, so they want you to pull out a red print and the pink print for the tulips, and these are the 2 that I used. Okay, and then you pull out for the daisies, a red print and a pink print for the daisies, and that's these 2. So I'm going to set these aside. Okay, those are in the daisies. And then it wants me to pull the blueprints that I'm using in the hydrangea blocks, which are this one and this one. Okay, so I'm pulling those. And the greens. So I've used this one and this one for the leaves. This is the tulip leaves and this is the daisy leaves. And we'll pull those. And then, let's see. Oh, we also need a little bit of black. And I think I used this black. And it is the center of our daisy. So it's just a tiny bit, but I'm going to pull this out because we want to get all of these cut first so that we have the right amount, enough fabric to do these blocks. And then the leftover pieces we'll use in our stars. Okay? And then I also am going to pull out the white on white print. This is the queen bee print, and I've used that with the panel blocks a little bit. We'll get to that later. And this other white print with the bees, I didn't use at all, so I'm going to pull that and set that aside. So to start with, I'm going to cut these fabrics, and they're listed. The cutting instructions are right here. You don't need very much. For instance, from this red print, this one, you cut 12 rectangles 2 by 5. So you'll have at least a half of a fat quarter left over. So first do all of this cutting for these prints, and then we'll cut the fat quarters. So I'm going to set these aside, and we'll pull out a fat quarter right here, and I'll show you how I'm going to cut those. And let's just, this is, I'm pulling this one out because it's directional, and I wanted you to see, let me get this ironed, put this over here. I'm going to press it. Okay, now I've got my fat quarter, and I'm going to cut some strips on it. And in the pattern, there is a diagram right here of how to cut your fat quarter so that you get the right number of pieces. I would layer 2 or maybe 3 fat quarters together because you're cutting them all exactly the same. So I'd pull out another one, maybe this red one, press it good, and layer it on my cutting board, and then I'm ready to cut. Now, you can see sometimes there's a discrepancy in the size of fat quarters, but it's not a lot, and there's plenty of room. Now, if you're using these fat quarters from Riley Blake, this is the Perennial collection, these actually measure about 21 inches in height, which means that the fabric was 42 inches wide. Some fabrics are a little skinnier, but you only actually need 19.5 inches. Now this one has the selvage on this side. This doesn't have the white part on the selvage, but oftentimes on half of them you will have a white edge, and you're going to, of course, cut that off. And I would cut that off, and then I would measure from here and start cutting the strips that are needed. And if you cut several at a time, that's going to make it quicker for you. And you can see that we're going to cut, I believe it is 8 2-inch rows and 1 3.5-inch row. And I would advise you to cut the 3.5-inch row first to make sure that you've got plenty, because there are, when we cut all of these fat quarters into this configuration, we have plenty of squares. And that makes it so that we have plenty to choose from when we're grabbing randomly so that the pieces will match together. So you will have extra, not a whole lot, but there is plenty of extra. So let me just show you. I've already cut 1 fat quarter for you here. And here is the 3.5-inch row. And on this row I cut 3 squares that are 3.5 inch. And then I did the 1.5-inch squares. And then in the 2-inch rows I've got some rectangles and a couple extra squares, and then the rest of it is cut into 2-inch squares. And then I stacked these squares all up and put them on a board so that I have everything accessible for me to grab when I'm ready to start preparing my blocks. So I've got a picture of how all of my pieces were laid out when I had them labeled, my white pieces and also my squares that were cut from my fat quarters. And I can show you how I had that all arranged on my sewing table at home. Okay, so that's basically the things we needed to do to get the cutting done. And then the next part of the pattern, and this is on page 3, is just some basic information about how to prepare sections of the quilt so that I didn't rewrite this every time we made a block. So it basically tells you how to do a corner triangle, flying geese unit, a half square triangle, and a 4-patch unit, and a square and a square unit. And these will all be used in different ways throughout quilt, so I won't go over these today, because when we use them, we'll refer back to this section, and I will help you learn to make those. And then on the next page, page 4, we're ready to start. So this one, we start with star A block, and that will be next week, and we're going to make 9 blocks that are star A block. And then we move on to star B, C, D, E, like that each week. So we're ready to go. Get all your cutting done this week and get your pieces laid out and organized so that you know exactly what you need. And then next week we'll start sewing on the star blocks.